This episode of EMS One-Stop is brought to you by Lexipol, the experts in policy, training, wellness support and grants assistance for first responders and government leaders. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's lexipol.com. Hello and welcome back to another edition of EMS One-Stop. I am, as always, your host, Rob Lawrence, and today we're talking about blood. And it is a topic that is trending significantly here in the United States. And if you're watching from elsewhere or listening from elsewhere, it is on the up here. There's a lot of work going on. All parts of blood are being infused and transfused. And we're here to talk about that with our good friends from New Orleans EMS. And I'd like to introduce Tom and Dr. David. Would you like to introduce yourselves, please? Tom, over to you.
Yeah, hi, Rob. Thanks for having us on today. Tom Dransfield. I'm the Quality Assurance and Safety Officer here at New Orleans EMS. Kind of manage our whole blood program ever since the inception, and I keep up with all the numbers with all that, in addition to all the other stuff that we track here.
Doc.
Yeah, actually, great. Thanks for having us with you today. I'm David Rayburn. I'm an EMS physician, but also an emergency medicine physician, pediatrician as well. So wear many hats. My hat with the agency is as deputy medical director. And while the blood program started before my time, I've definitely been involved with the program, particularly on the research side of things moving forward.
So I have to actually give a shout out at this point to Dr. Emily Nichols and indeed Dr. Meg Marino, who have been guests on a number of podcasts I've done before. And so they, of course, are some of your great leaders that you've had involved in the program and obviously leading the organization now. Blood, of course, it is on the up. You are doing it. You're doing it a lot. So kind of give us the backstory. And again, my question here is a lot of folk are looking to the research in order to start. And it's that kind of chicken and egg situation where do we start and get the research, or do we do the research and then start? So give us the backstory in New Orleans and the story so far.
Yeah. So thanks, Rob. So I'll just take this one real quick, but so we started looking at this back in 2019-ish. So we were in looking at like what we could do to improve the care that we provided to our citizens and visitors here that come to New Orleans. We have obviously high trauma rate. At that point, we were topping the charts, right? Being number one in the wrong categories, right? You know, violence and stuff like that. So our medics were very frustrated with just the old scoop and run and fill them up with pasta water and all that other good stuff. So we wanted a definitive care. So we started talking with the trauma center about what we could do. We talked about TXA for several times, and that's another controversial topic we can get into later for probably a whole nother podcast. But so we worked with the trauma center, and Dr. Nichols at the time was our medical director, and she said, like, let's just go for let's do some blood administration. I've been a paramedic now going on 36 years, and it's like it was something that we'd all dreamed about, right? And it's like, no way we're ever going to carry blood, and be able to handle that pre-hospital. So we started looking at what was out there, and the big players at the time were the guys in Texas: San Antonio, Cypress Creek EMS, San Antonio Fire, Cypress Creek EMS, and then Harris County ESD was one of the ones. So I just reached out to those guys, and they were very instrumental in helping us research the do's and the don'ts, and like, this is our lessons learned and vice versa. So that was where I started looking at, like, from the EMS side. As far as research and all that, there wasn't a whole lot of stuff published out there about pre-hospital blood. So we kind of went into the dark on that, just into a void of, okay, we'll just see what happens. And we've learned along the way. And we continue to do that now with others. We're working with all these other agencies because we've been doing it since we went live in October of 2021 is when we have. And up to date, we've had 290 administrations of blood. And we've learned as we went, and so, but it's been a good process for us because it's given us another tool to do it. Now we're doing a little bit different than everybody else. Everybody else is doing whole blood therapy, and we're doing packed red blood cells. And that's not because we don't want to do whole blood. It's just our local blood center. That's all they can really guarantee us and supply us right now. They're set up for the PRBCs and component therapy. And we chose, because we did it all on a shoestring budget, to not warm our blood, right? Because we couldn't afford a warmer off the gate, off the beginning. So we said, we're going to do cold blood. We asked the trauma center, can you do that? You know, you talk about the death diamond, and everybody says like, oh, if you cool them off too much, and Dr. Rayburn can probably speak on this, you know, from the trauma center side of things and the MD side is that, you know, cold blood's going to just throw them into shock, and they're going to just be hypothermic as all get out, right? We thought, and our theory was at the time, the 2 units that we're going to give is not going to affect them that much. The blood, given the blood and the components and what it does, the oxygen carrying capacity it's going to increase is going to outweigh the risk of the cold. And so we do cold blood component therapy, PRBCs.
So, Tom, what you've said already is probably raising a few eyebrows of those both watching and listening. So, Doc, I mean, talk us through clinically. I mean, the PRBC choice, and we'll come on to logistics in a second because that's on my kind of question list. And obviously, not having a warmer, cool blood administration. Obviously, you've got results to show that it's working. But I mean, take a deep dive into the thought process for doing all of that for us.
Yeah, and I think part of it too is just going back to the, do you put the cart before the horse?
Right.
There wasn't a lot of literature or data to suggest what the best practice was. And so the decision was made by Dr. Nichols and the team to move forward with this, knowing that we were already in a bad situation in the area with the amount of penetrating trauma that we were experiencing. And we're like, okay, let's go forward with this. So, as far as the component therapy is concerned, we had to work with what we were able to get. And I think that's one piece. And as Tom mentioned, it's not that we didn't want to do whole blood. It's not something that was readily available to us. So the thought process is, if we can put those red blood cells back in there and they can carry oxygen to the tissues that need it, then that's going to help buy us that time to get them to the trauma center, get them to the trauma surgeon, and get them the other components of the therapy that they need. The cold thing is actually super interesting, and I'll leave the listeners hanging a little bit, is we are working on a manuscript right now to publish on our data for the cold blood administration. Because that is we still raise so many eyebrows across the United States at conferences. People still come up to us and like, why are you not warming it? And it's like, well, we've done it almost 300 times now. Why warm it now? It's working. And I will just put a little spoiler alert in there of the administrations that we have good temperature data on. We're looking at no change in temperature for the 2 units of packed red blood cells cold in the pre-hospital environment.
Well, first, wow. Secondly, but of course there has been subsequent research, and obviously Tulane and the good folk there, Dr. Duchesne has issued, or you've got work that Dr. Nichols was involved with, and obviously that gives you a sort of body of evidence and support both to do what you do and obviously to keep going. So do you want to describe some of those papers?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first paper was really just looking at the concept of doing this pre-hospital bundle. And, what if we give them blood and we're going to give them cold blood, and then we want to make sure that we don't have the issues with hypocalcemia, so let's give them some calcium. And then looking at the studies on TXA, and again, as Tom alluded to, that's probably worth a whole nother discussion, but let's do what we can to help stop bleeding while we fill the tank back up. So we'll give them some TXA as well. So kind of looking at that bundle and how it worked out for us, I think was one of the first papers that Dr. Duchesne and his group published on. And it showed, not surprisingly, it worked, right? We were saving lives. And then subsequent research, which I think is even more profound, is looking at the time, right? So for every minute that we are delaying administering blood products, there's a dramatic increase in mortality. So
11%.
Right. So 11%, you can't argue with those numbers. And knowing again that we don't have long transport times where we are, but other people that are considering this in their agency that have longer transport times, those additional minutes are adding up very quickly for mortality risk.
It's a bit like going back to, Eisenberg et al., the chain of survival, the sort of cardiac survival rule, 1 minute of delay equates to X, percentage chance of survival from a cardiac perspective. Of course, you've just framed the same thought now for hemorrhage control and for the infusion of a blood product. So that graph's already firmly implanted in my mind. By the way, if you are listening to this podcast right now, all of the references and the links that we're talking about are in the show notes. Of course, if you're watching us on YouTube, and don't forget you can both listen to us and watch us, then some of the some of the paper titles, conclusions, etc., are on the screen as we've been talking through. So if you're listening, watch, and if you watch, have a listen. We talked about logistics. So one of the issues, and I've talked to folk like Dr. John Kramer and co from the Whole Blood Coalition about, the effort to roll this out across the country. Obviously, you mentioned the, PRBCs are the only thing you can get. Is that, is that logistics supply chain solid? Is always going to be there? You're always going to have supply? Has there been challenges in that? I mean, logistically, which of course is my contention, of course, is if everybody does blood, then there's not enough blood to go around, right? So,
Right.
But how are you doing it? How is it
I think
working?
the misconception, I'll talk about that. The misconception is that we're putting it on every ambulance. Our concept is not to put it on every ambulance, is we put it on what we call a sprint car. Some people call it a fly car or an intercept, paramedic intercept. But so it's one of our blood medics is in that, and they carry the blood in that, so they can intercept a unit, or they respond to the scene with them. So it's not every ambulance. So if we put it on every ambulance, that'd be 20 a day for us.
Yeah.
So that's going to add up, and that is going to be a supply. Blood is not a guarantee, right? And that's the thing. So it's a valuable commodity is what we call it. So our blood center is fortunate enough to be here in town. Other places, other services I've talked to around the country, they're having to get it from out of state. They just use a supplier like One Blood or somebody like that. Like does everybody in like Florida is the company there is. But our blood center is right down the road from us, and they are very, very good in supplying us what they can. Now, here recently, we did have a little bit of shortage. We got down to like our bare minimum stock, which was like 3 units, right? And they were able to get us taken care of, but we're doing some donor drives with them and some other things. And it's a constant battle of trying to get donors and just to supply what we need to, because it is not it is an expirable commodity. Blood is like, it only has a shelf life of X amount of days. So we're fortunate enough with the deal that we have with our blood center. It's like a consignment. So we keep the blood for 14 days. And then after 14 days, if we haven't used it, they take it back and they bring us fresh blood for another 14. So whole blood, unfortunately, is if once you put that in my hands or put it in our freezer or fridge, it's ours, and they're not going to take that back, and they won't do a consignment deal with us. So that was one of the limiting factors. But then it's their process and their production. Blood is certain. I guess what I had to learn is that certain labs can make blood, either component out, whole blood, or whatever, how they do it. So it's a setup cost and how they're all doing their business. Which I've learned more on that just studying it. But my recommendation to anybody doing a blood program is you start with your blood vendor is who you need to start with, because they make or break your process. You can have all the gadgets in the world, but if you can't get the blood and you don't have a good process to get it with them, that's going to be a hindrance to you.
Great anticipation, Tom. You've answered about 5 other questions I had there in one go, which is great because, of course, again, I'm the old ops chief, right? So it's all about the logistics. It's about the how do we set it up? It's about the how do we take it on board? How long do we keep it for? Can we rotate it? Are we going to waste any away? And obviously, those are key considerations when going through the program. The touchy question, and I'm going to ask it: who's paying for it?
Currently in New Orleans, we're paying for it with like the health department's helping us pay for it. We're eating the cost, essentially. The city has decided that Mary Kane Trail, when we first started this, she supported us 110%, and the differences that we're making and the impact of the like I said, the citizens, the visitors here in New Orleans, it's worthwhile. It's like it's about $1,200 per administration that we do. So we budget for that, and it's just a line item. I believe it's between the health department, and I don't know if they have a grant that's helping pay for that or not. I'm not 100% sure, but we've been fortunate and blessed with that we have that ability, and they're willing to support that. They're working now to get that as through John Cromer and his guys, of the coalition, and we're trying to get all reimbursable, and that's just been an uphill battle, but they're making strides every day on that.
I'm going to hop in real quick for a second, and something that Dr. Marino often talks about is that we're decreasing the murder rate in New Orleans. And I think when you look at that is impactful. And then people start to listen, and people are willing to maybe spend a little cash to make something like that happen. And so, hopefully this will change. And with more agencies starting to do this, we're going to get more literature and data to support the fact that blood in the pre-hospital environment saves lives. It's a lot easier for money to start coming from other sources when you're saying something as powerful as that statement.
Excellent. Well, thank you for that. And I'll come back to that after the break. But just for the moment, let's have a quick word from our sponsor.
Lexipol empowers first responders and public servants to best meet the needs of their residents safely and responsibly. Serving more than 2 million public safety and government professionals in over 8,000 agencies and municipalities, Lexipol offers a range of solutions that includes policies, training, behavioral health resources, news and analysis, and grant assistance services for law enforcement, fire and rescue, EMS, local government, and other agencies dedicated to public safety. To learn more, visit lexipol.com. That's LEXIPOL.com.
Welcome back. That, of course, was the smooth voice of Jim Dudley, who is the presenter of Policing Matters over on Police One. Even if you're not a cop, there's always some amazing discussion going on in the law enforcement world, whether it's with police chiefs, whether it's with the FBI, whether it's with the Department of Justice. It's all over there on Police One, so go and have a listen to that. Also, please make sure that you like and subscribe on the platform that you get your podcast or your vodcast on. Remember that we're on every podcast platform you can imagine. We're also on YouTube, so you can see us as well as hear us. So that's how we do that. We're talking about blood, and we have Dr. Rayburn and Tom with us from New Orleans EMS. So just picking up on where we were before we went to break. It's interesting that you made the statement that you've reduced the homicide rate, and this takes me back to my time in Virginia. Again, a classic inner city scenario with a lot of, penetrating trauma, a lot of violence in one area of town. And I looked at your heat map, and of course you have a similar one area of town that I used to have. And of course our police colleagues, had said that, we're solving the murder rate. And of course, we looked at the data. And again, this is the topic of this particular segment. We looked at the data and we realized that the shootings were going up, but the homicides were going down because of the intervention of EMS and aggressive surgical resuscitation minutes after arrival. And I'm thinking that this is the same story for you guys. And so that's commendable. And the point being is, look at your data, see what you're doing, working out the difference you make, or work out the difference that you could make if you applied the same principles as New Orleans, right?
Yeah, most of our, according to the heat map, and it shows that most of our trauma, the majority of it is within 5 miles of the trauma center. So, which we found was kind of interesting. We all traditionally think we're further away than that. It seems like that sometimes when you're out there and trying to get everything loaded up and get going, but we still strive for our 10-minute scene times and to maintain that quick transport. So we found we might have increased it by 2 to 3 to 5 minutes maybe overall, but we're providing definitive care at point of contact. That was the big thing that we had to tell our people, and it was kind of a mindset change. You don't have to hurry as much. Still need to have your sense of urgency and your pace, but you're not just scooping and running anymore. Those days are gone. We're providing definitive care. So get your stuff going, get set, get established, because you don't want to risk, not having an IV or having your IV get pulled out by bouncing down our nice quality roads that we have, and just because you're providing that definitive care. And we've seen that in one of the papers that Duchesne and his group put together is the XABC, right? So if we resuscitate before we intubate is basically what it is. And that's some of the anecdotal stuff that we found is like, we're resuscitating these people with fluid, right? Blood, whatever you want to call it. I think Rayburn said it earlier. You stop the bleed and you fill the tank, right? So if we're doing that, then we're having a more stable patient arrive at the hospital that we're not having to do advanced airway interventions on, and that's just something that we had to retrain our mindset, because what does a paramedic want to do? They want to intubate everybody, right? If they have that laryngoscope, that's what they want to do. And so it was a mindset is like, hey, let's fluid resuscitate them if we need to. You can support them a little bit with a BVM, but they're going to wake up. They're going to go from a GCS of like 6 to maybe a GCS of 10 or 12. Able to support their own airway and limit that intervention. So that's some of the stuff that we found with that, and his paper kind of shows that.
Excellent. XABC, in fact, I recently reviewed a manuscript from all of the trauma surgeons of the Pan American Trauma Society. So we're talking Argentina to Alaska. And they are proposing XABC as a method to be adopted everywhere, and not just in the US. So, we're all onto something. I wanted also just to come back on another point we made before the break, and that's around funding of whole blood, and the Blood Coalition and a number of our national associations actually have written a joint sort of letterheaded letter in order to get not only whole blood but its constituent parts funded. Obviously, it's admirable and laudable that New Orleans has either a grant funding or a source of income, but again, that is not the same absolutely anywhere else. And so, therefore, getting this funded, we are now showing through research, through data, that it's making a difference. Now we need to actually demonstrate this to our friends at CMS so they put some reimbursement in as well. Otherwise, it becomes, in some parts of the country, a massive loss leader, doing the right thing, but no funding to do the right thing. So the call to action is, if you have a legislator out there, drop the word whole blood or blood and say this is actually worth doing and worth supporting, worth voting for, because it's actually a key life-saving activity. Talking of key life-saving activities, we were discussing in the break there, it's not just penetrating trauma now, we're doing other emergencies as well, Dr. Rayburn.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's easy to say, penetrating trauma, we lost a bunch of blood, we're in hemorrhagic shock, but there's certainly other causes of bleeding. And so we added it in the last year to include medical causes of hemorrhagic shock as well. GI bleeds. We've done a couple OB patients, and then also fistula bleeds in our renal patients as well. So having that way to, again, fill that tank back up with what it actually needs, right? It's like trying to put water in our gas tanks. That's not going to work. We put gas in our gas tanks, our cars run. So it's the same thing. We're putting blood back in the tank, and the car's running again. And we found that we keep pushing the envelope. Honestly, it's one of those, see the need and give it a try, unless there's some great reason not to. And our paramedics also, they're brilliant folks that love to push the envelope and figure out what else can we be doing to help our patients. And so when we were just doing it for trauma, they're like, well, what about this, this GI bleed that I had that was hypotensive, and had, a profound blood loss on scene. It's like, well, why not? We have the product, we have what they need. And that's how we've expanded this.
Excellent. Coming back to you, Tom, in terms of training those people that are going to do this, obviously all paramedics have a good idea of when this procedure is indicated. But in terms of those that are actually doing it, what additional training are you doing? What sort of continuing education are you doing? What do they need to do in order to be on the team to deliver this treatment and procedure?
Yeah, so we have our concept is, we call them blood medics is what we call them. And so we kind of do a twofold concept in their training. Is I send them a bunch of articles and webinars and other things to research ahead of time. That way, when we get them in the classroom, we're just doing hands-on stuff, right? Is like, this is how the components work. We use the LifeFlow device as for our administration of blood. Yep. So we have them go through the mechanics of that, know the ins and the outs of that, so they're comfortable with it. So it becomes second nature. And it takes a while if you haven't done a blood administration. The first one you do is you're going to be nervous, you're going to be fumbling with it. But We try to do that in training. We have them do scenarios with that. And then from then on, once you become a blood medic, you just, are in the sprint. We do a 2 medic concept when we administer blood, kind of like an RSI would, that the blood medic is solely responsible for maintaining the blood access and managing that portion of the care. And then the other paramedic in the transport aim, we call it the transport medic or whatever. He or she is tasked with maintaining an airway and getting any other additional interventions that need to be done and kind of managing the patient. So we found trying to do with one medic doing everything, nothing was getting done, right? Things were getting missed, so they couldn't focus on it. So we currently have about 52 medics that are considered blood medics. So basically, once you get off your 1-year probation, we let you take the training for that because we want you to be comfortable in working in our system. And you get to see all these things. And most of these, we're a small, big company, I would say. The same with our city. We're a small city with big city problems. Geographically, we're not big, too far spread out, too big population, but we have a lot of bad stuff that happens, unfortunately. So they get that exposure and that experience. So when they get time, it's their time to do it. They're ready to go. They've seen blood administered a couple of times, so they're comfortable with that.
From a quality perspective, I know that you guys are also using Axon body-worn cameras. Do you use that as part of the sort of quality control, quality assurance?
Yeah, that's really
after
helped
action?
us. That's really helped us when we first started doing the training. We didn't have the cameras. Now I can take and show them, hey, this is kind of what a blood call looks like, right? This is how it should run, and good and bad. It's like we can say like this one didn't go so good. Why didn't this go good? We can go back retrospectively and look at it as like, okay, you didn't delegate your task. And we kind of took the concept of pit crew CPR. We put that in as pit crew blood administration, because that's what the feedback for our initial group was. The first OG blood medics we had here, I said, how can we improve the process? And they go, well, we just need to give everybody a job. It's like, I said, well, let's just do this pit crew stuff. So we sat down and we developed like assigned roles, basically. Who's going to put them on the monitor? Who's going to make sure the airway's done? Who's going to do the big thing is getting the temps. We want a pre-blood temp and a post-blood temp. That's for transfusion reaction, but we're also anecdotally on the back end. We want to be able to study that. And that's what Dr. Rayburn is trying to get us all wrinkled in now, all this data we have with all our calls, to see if we can study that and figure out if we did have any difference in it,
That's excellent. And do you review, and again, like with cardiac arrests or penetrating trauma calls, are you reviewing 100% of those particular calls and the records, et cetera, that goes with it?
Yeah, we're not looking at every body cam, but we are looking at every report gets looked at. By me, I look at it as a quality assurance guy, and then Dr. Rayburn looks at it he's able to get the hospital follow-ups, and we report back to the crews as like, hey, this is what you did, this is what actually was wrong with them. This is where their injuries were, this was their course, anything that needed to be, done differently or could have been done differently. It's like some of the stuff is like, unfortunately, it's just non-survivable trauma. It's just like we have some big bad, guns and stuff out here they're doing a lot of damage, and they unfortunately is like no matter whatever effort, our best efforts just sometimes aren't enough. So
right.
Sorry,
Doc, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in, and I think that from a quality improvement standpoint and an education standpoint, best practice I think would be for us to be able to review 100% of those body-worn cameras footage for our blood calls and our cardiac arrests, and I think that's future state for us because it's a treasure trove of data. And I think from a paramedic perspective, and honestly, as me being a teacher of young physicians as well, being able to see yourself and what you were doing at that time is much more powerful than somebody telling you, well, this is what I saw. And it's like, no, you just watched yourself do X, Y, and Z. And I think that is really where you drive some of those improvement measures.
Yeah. And I hope we can come back at some other point and talk about your use of body-worn cameras. Obviously, our colleagues in police are pretty much 100%, used to and exposed to them. Obviously, it's a growing sort of trend, let's call it that, in EMS. And obviously there's a number of reasons from a clinical perspective, from just a self-preservation perspective, as we're seeing, and as we know from some pretty, interesting, let's call them that, cases around the country could have done with having our version of a body-worn camera as well. Before we go, of course, you've got 290 cases under your belt. You wouldn't have, and you've hinted the research is on the way, but from where you have done research, particularly in terms of known survival to discharge, and I saw on social media this week some other colleagues who are already doing whole blood, getting a little bit, coming back at some people that were being the naysayers, let's call them that. And obviously there is some good results, some good data coming out. But what have you found in terms of survival to discharge of those that you have surveyed so far? And obviously, let's just acknowledge that HIE is not totally 100% universal. We can't really drill into, the patient care record into the back end of the hospital. We know that's on our massive to-do list. But what have you found so far?
Yeah, and being an incomplete data set, I would say, excluding the traumatic cardiac arrest, we had over 90% survival to hospital admission. And then near that for hospital discharge as well for our penetrating trauma victims. I think that, getting some of that data down the road, 30, 60, 90-day survival would be great. As I'm sure some of our listeners, they have communication issues with their hospital systems. And so, we're doing the best we can getting that information. Yeah. And we hope to continue to show these numbers that this therapy really is saving lives and making a difference in our communities.
Excellent. Thank you. You've both offered some great insights, some amazing takeaways for those that are listening, those that are either A, doing it already, or B, contemplating it. So thank you for that. I always end with the following question. Is there anything I've forgotten to ask or anything else you need to tell us? And we'll start with you, Tom.
I don't think there's anything that you really forgot. It's like this, I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours and hours. It's one of my passions. Like I said, I've been with this from the inception of it. And it's like, I know, that I like to share this with everybody. That's always been my passion. As long as I've been in EMS, I've been a teacher, I've been a mentor, I've been whatever. And I want to pass forward on like our experiences so others don't have to repeat the same mistakes or the same errors that we did. So I'm really strive every day. My email box, I get these random emails from people. And they're so appreciative and like, hey, I hate to ask, can I get this? It's like, we're an open book. And I'm honored to be with an organization that allows me to share openly all of our stuff, our guidelines, our protocols, or what we're using for equipment and just all that good stuff. So, if anybody wants to reach out, I don't know if Rob's going to put our contact number up, but you just look me up on the website, but my email will be there. But just email us. We'll be more than happy to talk with y'all and just to share our experiences and, pay it forward is what I say.
Great. And yes, of course, all of the contact details are going to be in the show notes. Dr. Rayburn, final word goes to you.
Yeah, I like I said, I hinted at it, but I'm really excited for us to put this data out to the world on cold blood administration. People will be able to pick it apart. It's retrospective in nature, but I think our numbers are gonna be pretty telling that what we're doing is not harming patients at all, and quite the opposite, saving lives. So we're excited to move this forward, and I really appreciate you having us on your show with us today.
Yeah, well, sure. Thank you. No, I can officially tell you I'm going to entitle this podcast "Stop the Bleed, Fill the Tank." You've really brought that point home. If you need, to be quickly reminded what to do, that was it. I was talking to other folk that are doing blood programs, and their advice was, listen, it came out of the patient, all we're doing is putting it back in again. So it's a similar theme, and it's not as simple as that, but it is. So thank you for doing what you're doing. We're going to watch this very, very closely. I know that we're going to have folk from New Orleans back on again because you're doing some amazing stuff, and we're going to talk about that later. But for the moment, both of you, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks for having us, Rob.
Okay, that was another EMS One-Stop. Yes, Stop the Bleed, Fill the Tank. The cold-blooded EMS medics of New Orleans. We'll come up with some great titles. But that said, thanks to both of them. As I say, we're going to follow on New Orleans. They're doing some cool stuff, and they're quite right. They are punching far above their weight, and we're excited to follow them. So everything we've talked about is in the show notes. Don't forget, if you're listening, you can watch on YouTube. If you're YouTube, you can listen to on wherever you get your podcasts. But please make sure you like and subscribe. That's been another EMS One Stop. Thank you to my guests. I've been Rob Lawrence. And until next time, bye for now.